As the steam age pressed on, demand for more powerful locomotives grew. Naturally, the way to make a steam engine more powerful is to make it bigger, but there's only so big you can make a locomotive before it's unable to negotiate turns without destroying the rails. This required engineers to find ways of making locomotives more flexible, and in this video, we're going to take a look at one of the ways they did it. Today we're looking at Fairlie engines. The arrangement of a Fairlie engine has a lot in common with that of a Meyer. Just like a Meyer, the driving wheels are fitted to a pair of bogies which are connected to the main body of the locomotive via articulated joints. Because the driving wheels aren't rigidly connected to the frame of the locomotive, they can freely swivel, providing the engine with much greater flexibility and allowing it to negotiate tighter bends and rougher rails much better. What distinguishes a Fairlie from a Meyer, however, is the design of the boiler, position of the cylinders, and a lack of guiding or trailing wheels. While Meyers typically follow a traditional locomotive design, Fairlies are double-ended, having a smoke box and funnel at each end, a cab in the middle of the locomotive, and two boilers that share the same firebox. Because the engine has two smoke boxes, the cylinders of the bogies face outwards to help when exhausting steam, unlike the Meyers in which their cylinder placement often varies between designs. Another key feature is the Fairlie's lack of unpowered wheels on their bogies. This way, all of the engine's weight is on the driving wheels to help improve tractive effort. Larger Meyers often have guiding wheels on their bogies to help with stability, but standard Fairlies never do regardless of size. The firebox being set between the two bogies also meant there was enough room for a larger firebox without getting in the way of the wheels. The first example of a Fairlie locomotive came about in 1851. Built for the Semmering trials, the engine was named Suron and had two separate boilers connected by one firebox. The articulation of the bogies was very restrictive compared to the later Fairlies. It steamed poorly and the flexible steam pipes leaked heavily while in operation, leading to the engine being taken out of service not long after the trials. Years later, in 1864, Scottish engineer Robert Francis Fairlie patented a design for his double-ended locomotive. While his design shared a lot in common with Suron, it seems that he mostly drew inspiration from the powered tender locomotives of the Great Northern Railway and the practice of running locomotives back-to-back on the Borgat Incline in India. The idea of having two engines running back-to-back seems to have been the main driving force behind Fairlie's design, as it meant it would have the power of two engines in one while maintaining the same flexibility of two smaller engines coupled together, and the locomotive wouldn't need to waste time shunting or being turned around at the end of the line. The first Fairlie engine was built in 1865 by James Cross and Company for the Neath and Brecon Railway, and named the Progress. It was an instant disappointment. Typically, in a steam locomotive, hot gases flow from the firebox through the boiler and into the smoke box, with the exhaust of the cylinders being used to help produce a draft to draw the heat through the boiler tubes. Because the two boilers of the Fairlie shared a firebox, the hot gases were being pulled in two different directions which ruined the airflow, resulting in poor steaming. The Progress also suffered from its flexible steam pipes breaking, and its brakes were very unconventional, being chain operated and using an extra wheel that was mounted on each axle for stopping. In 1866, Fairlie's second locomotive, Mountaineer, was built for the Anglesey Central Railway. The boiler issue was amended by installing two separate fireboxes in place of one big one, so each boiler could produce and maintain their own draft much better. Mountaineer also used ball and socket joints to transfer steam to the cylinders and was fitted with traditional brakes. This arrangement greatly improved the engine's performance compared to the Progress, and with this success, Fairlie went to the Festiniog Railway in Wales to further promote his locomotives. In 1869, George England and Company built Little Wonder for use on the Festiniog, Fairlie choosing the railway specifically as it was both steep and possessed many tight bends, the perfect place to demonstrate what his design could do. He invited engineers from all over the world to Wales to see his locomotive in action, as well as promote the concept of narrow-gauge railways to countries looking to build lines up and along mountainous terrain. The event was a great success, and Fairlie ended up selling his design to several railways all over the world, the double-ended nature of the engines earning them the designation of double Fairlies. As popular as they weren't without their flaws. Firstly was how awkward they were to operate. Because the boiler and double firebox ran through the cab, it left little room for the driver and fireman to stand. On top of that, the fireman was essentially in charge of maintaining two separate fires, meaning the Fairlies either required double the work to keep them in steam, or two firemen would be needed to do the job on an already crowded footplate. It also meant the crew was stuck on their respective sides of the cab with no way for one to access the other side while the engine was in motion. Quite a big safety issue should the driver become incapacitated while the throttle is wide open. It also meant that since the engine didn't need to be turned around, it'd be left-hand drive going one way and right-hand drive going the other, something that made reading signals and looking ahead awkward on certain railways. A variation of the double Fairlie fixed some of the cab issues by having the boilers and fireboxes be completely separate, essentially making them two fully separate steam locomotives with a shared cab, but these required an additional fireman to operate, and one can only imagine how hard it was for the driver to manage two sets of controls at once. The flexible steam joints proved to be a constant source of trouble too for many railways, and while the issue was eventually amended, by that point more powerful, reliable, and less maintenance-intensive engines had been introduced. The lack of room for fuel and water storage too was a major issue. Tank engines typically carry water in tanks on either side of, on top of, or underneath their boiler, and carry fuel in bunkers behind their cab. Because of the Fairlie's layout, however, there was limited space to store fuel and water, since the bogies meant a well tank was impossible, and being double-ended meant there was nowhere for a bunker or a tender. Side and saddle tanks were the only options, but a balance between fuel and water storage had to be struck since increasing the capacity of one meant decreasing the capacity of another, and even then there was still hardly room for either. But the most troublesome aspect of the Fairlies was their bogies. Unpowered wheels help stabilise locomotives at higher speeds, and while Fairlie's goal of getting the most tractive effort out of the engine by having only powered wheels was admirable, it also meant that his engines initially rode rough at speed and wore out both the rails and themselves quickly. This problem was solved by adding weight to the rear ends of the bogies to help balance out the cylinders, but like with the flexible pipes, this solution came too little too late, as Mayers, Malays, and Garretts were starting to emerge by the time the issue was put right. These issues resulted in the engines ordered for use in Canada, the US, Russia, Ireland, New Zealand, India, and Burma, all having relatively short service lives compared to their Welsh counterparts. Interestingly, the double Fairlie design did prove to be popular in Mexico, with 49 engines being built for use on the line between Mexico City and Veracruz. Though the double Fairlie proved to mostly be a bit of a gimmick, it did lead to the development of the single Fairlie, this essentially being one half of a double Fairlie with a larger cab, standard boiler, articulated powered bogie at the front, and an unpowered bogie under the cab. This design wasn't as powerful as a double Fairlie, but still possessed their flexibility while also having the benefits of a standard locomotive layout, such as a more spacious cab and somewhere to connect a tender for extra fuel and water storage. The single Fairlie design originated in Ireland but proved to be very popular in the US in the form of the Mason bogie locomotives. Other variations include the Peugeot-Bourdon locomotives in France and the unusual Fairlie Mayer-Garrett hybrids of South Africa, but the popularity of the standard double Fairlies quickly faded, and practically no more were being built by the turn of the century. All of them had been withdrawn by the end of the 1930s, with the exception of the ones working on the Festiniog Railway in Wales, the railway having been given a free perpetual licence to use Fairlie's designs as thanks for helping him with publicity, and as a result, double Fairlies still work the line to this day. Compared to the Mayers, Malays, and Garretts, the Fairlies are certainly some of the more unusual articulated locomotives. While perhaps not as practical as their other articulated counterparts, they still stand as one of the earliest examples of an articulated locomotive design. Their double-ended nature was perhaps more of a gimmick than a practical solution, but as far as mountain engines go, it's hard to say they aren't fairly striking when compared to the rest. Subscribe for more.